Good evening, everyone. It's January 12th, 7:32 p.m. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. In terms of our agenda tonight, I'd like to propose making one change to the agenda before we kick things off. There was an item that Jen sent around to you all regarding the police generator emergency issue we're going to deal with in terms of our transfer. So what I'd like to do is add that as a very first item on our discussion items. Can I have a motion to add that? Rob moves. Dan seconds. All in favor? Okay. So to kick things off, we'll start off with public comment. Okay, Jen, have we received any via email?
We have not.
Okay, no public comment. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is going to be what I just added. Spoke to Chief Anderson, and they have an emergency diesel-powered emergency generator that powers all aspects of the police station. It was discovered a few weeks ago that it's leaking, and they effectively need to sort of rebuild the overhead gaskets and so forth that are currently leaking. They discovered this during the normal sort of annual maintenance cycle that they were coming in to perform. So what he's asking for is for us to transfer $10,000 from one account that they currently have a surplus in. It's technically the crime and investigation account that they have a $10,000 surplus in, or he's asking us to transfer it from. That $10,000 was really earmarked towards the Historical Kids and Cops program. And you'll see, as we talked about here, there's been some changes just at the depot and within the police ranks that actually just didn't happen this year. And so that's freed up those dollars. So that $10,000 would be transferred from that criminal investigation and ID category into station operation and maintenance. They're going to try to get this done sort of as soon as possible. Couple days worth of work, but I think as you pointed out here, this is something that, although they have some battery backups on some of the electronic 911 systems and so forth, those have a very finite backup period. So having the generator is sort of mission critical, particularly during winter months.
Jim, did you say diesel?
Yes, it's diesel powered. It's 12 years old. It was installed there, I think, when we did the major overhaul of the police station. It's on it's out of warranty and so forth, but it is on a contract which we pay a couple $1,000s a year to have them come out, change the oil, monitor it, and service it, and do all of that. And this was discovered, a couple weeks ago, and so they've working on identifying the parts and so forth, and have asked the contractor to rush order it, but they do need to make this transfer. So this is not something that, this just kind of came up in the last 24, 48 hours. It's not something the Board of Selectmen needs to approve, just a transfer. So the chief is not here. I didn't think we needed him for this. Any questions?
No.
Kate, anything to add?
No.
Or Jen?
Nope.
Okay. So can I have a motion to transfer $10,000 from the criminal investigation and ID account to the station operation and maintenance for fixing the generator? Rob moves. John seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, the next item is going to be to discuss and take action on the Darien Police Association union contract. In our packet, there's a summary sent around. Kate, you want to just give us a little bit of background in terms of who was on
Sure.
the
Kate Bush,
committee
Town
and so forth?
Administrator. The negotiating team was comprised of myself, Jen Charneski, Susan Barksdale, who is our HR Director, and Kevin Cunningham, who's a member of the Police Commission. We started negotiations last spring. And, you know, I gotta say, it's a little challenging to be negotiating a union contract when inflation is running like it has been, because you don't want to respond too much to the inflation in case it stops, but you want to make sure that you're also recognizing that it's there. So the average annual increase of this agreement is about 0.03 mils based on the October 1, 2022 grand list. I think it's a fair contract for both the town and the union. We didn't get everything we wanted, and in some cases we had to give a little more than we wanted, but overall I think it's fair for both parties. So you can see the wage increases: 2 3/4, 2 3/4, 3 1/8, 3 1/8. We did also agree to pay them $1,500 upon the execution of a piece. Upon the execution of the contract. That only goes to people who are employed as of the date of the execution of the contract. That was a little bit of a recognition of what the inflation has been like in the past year. I think it's important to know, like when looking at the cost of this, that this union is pretty mature. There are only 5 steps in the patrol level and only 3 steps at the upper ranks, sergeant and lieutenant. So they do get to the top rank relatively quickly. It's about 6.5 years, 5.5 years, sorry, on the patrol level. So right now, you're looking at about 2/3 at the top rank. If nothing else changes by the end of this contract, 90% of them will be at the top rank. And what that means is the grid, they're no longer stepping. They're just getting the standard wage increase. We did get them to agree to increase their premium share. We are slowly getting it back up to where it had been before the town got them into the high deductible plan. That's happened with all of our unions. When they all went into the high deductible plan a number of years ago, the premium share was reduced dramatically. So it's been a slog getting everybody back up, and we're still not quite where we had been before that, but we're working on that. We made no other changes to the medical plan at this time, but we did, we agreed to offer an alternative deductible level. So right now, their deductibles are $2,000 for a single, $4,000 for a couple or a family. We're going to offer a $2,500 and $5,000 plan as well, with a lower premium share, would be 11%. If they would move into that. It's a way to incentivize them to take what would be for us a lower cost plan. So we'll see how that goes if anybody opts out for that. One of their big asks, and they've asked for this a number of years, is for a COLA in the pension. And that's a tough one. I mean, to me, COLAs are pension killers. They're just so expensive. But I recognize their desire to provide retirement savings for their employees, particularly the ones who no longer are the group that is not eligible for the retiree medical plan. So the thing we came up with that we agreed to is they're going to have the opportunity to cash in a certain number of sick days every year in exchange for a contribution to a 457 plan. So, good for us in that we get the sick days off the books, which can be a very costly item for us. And for them, it provides an opportunity for them to boost their retirement savings. So we're hopeful that it will work for both parties. We made some minor changes in the longevity and a small increase in the sick time accrual rate. And then there were some language changes about personal days and bereavement leave that don't really have a monetary impact. So those are the broad highlights, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Quick one, Kate, is if in fact they are able to deny the sick days payment and convert it into a retirement plan contribution, wouldn't that be taxable to them because they have the option of taking it and including it in their wages?
No. So basically they accrue a certain number of sick days every year, right? Okay, so say they accrue 12 sick days. What we're saying is at the end of the year, you can say, all right, I'm going to give up six sick days. And we put the value of that into the 457 for them. So the 457 is a tax, pre-tax contribution, so it's not a taxable event to them.
Okay, but it ultimately is when they get paid. Okay.
If they were paid the sick day as part of their work, they call out sick, yes, they'd be taxed on that.
All you're doing is deferring it, because when that money is paid out to them as retirement.
At retirement, yes,
And then they-
yes, but, as we all know, the theory is that when we retire, we're in a lower income tax bracket, and
We all hope.
we all hope.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of how many sick days can they carry over from one year to another?
There's no limit on carryover on the sick days.
And was there a limit put in place in connection with this, the ability to?
They can only they can only cash in 6. I'm gonna have trouble with that 6.
Sorry, how many do they get a year?
Depends on how many years they've been with us. They would max out at 18 a year.
Does this cover all of the uniformed officers, or are there a handful that are not that are not part of the union?
The only ones that are not part of the union are the captains and the chief, so
Right.
that they are not covered by that.
So this covers, what, 48 or so?
Well, right now, 46.
46, okay.
But yes, it would cover 48.
And then the 3.95% all-in cost, does that include the signing bonuses? The
Yes.
one-time? That does,
Yes.
okay.
That includes signing bonuses. It includes our increased cost for Medicare, our increased cost for workers' comp, an estimate of how much it would impact overtime.
And the step changes.
And the
There
step
are-
changes,
right.
yeah.
Even though most
Yeah.
of them are at the top step, will continue to be step changes.
What we do when we're going through negotiations is we chart out every officer, or with any union, but every employee, where they are when we're starting, what grade and step they're at, and then the impact. So we move them along each year so that we know not just the value of, their hourly rate going up, but what the actual movement is, so how much the steps cost us as well.
So this is similar to like how the Board of Ed reports it. It's inclusive of sort of step and,
Yeah, but
GWI.
and honestly, that's only as good as, who's here. During budget negotiation or budget discussions, the chief referred to how many people he thinks are going to retire in the next fiscal year. So right away, that changes, the picture.
And in terms of this is a 4-year contract,
Yes.
right? Why did we choose were we coming out of a 4-year contract or 3-year?
No, we were coming out of a 3-year contract.
What was the discussion around going to 4 years rather than 3?
They wanted the 4. We originally proposed a 3, but I was not opposed to a 4 if we could get decent terms.
And with respect to, this is going to be retroactive,
Yes.
is in terms of the funds that we set aside for this inside the current budget?
Yeah.
The back pay, are we within that?
Yep.
Okay. And so the thinking behind only allowing to sort of deposit 6 days, and you said it's on a pre-tax basis?
Mm-hmm.
So do we think that would have any sort of material impact on the contribution that we would need to make?
As opposed to,
For does them being able to contribute more into it?
well, we
Or I
don't
guess
make any
this going in this
contribution now.
457, not the pension.
Right,
Okay, so
Right.
no effect, okay.
right. Where it should save us is a couple places. One, for those who could cash them in at retirement, it would likely be at a higher rate. But more that it might deter use of sick time for, people when they're not sick. Because there's an incentive now to keep the sick time so that you can do this. And that saves us both in the officer out and the replacement.
But if they could carry unlimited sick days over.
Not all of
whenever-
them can cash them out at retirement.
Okay. So in theory, they shouldn't be forced to take these, and therefore us.
They're not, yeah, they're not forced to take them. This is strictly voluntary. But we're hoping that some of them might change their behavior in terms of usage of sick time because they have this opportunity.
Because sick time, you usually will incur sort of overtime of someone else to cover, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think as it relates to like our actions on this, just so you guys are aware, we have generally made sort of a recommendation to the RTM, but this doesn't formally need to be approved by the Board of Finance. It's similar to the Board of Ed budget, or Board of Ed teachers contract. We don't sort of approve it, if you will. We can choose to make a comment to sort of recommend it to the RTM.
And since we're talking contracts, you might want to start thinking about who you would like to be on the negotiating team from the Board of Finance for the Public Works contract. Because that is opening up, and we've received the initial request for information for bargaining with that union, so.
That last finished up right in the middle of COVID, right? Or right in the beginning?
It was delayed by COVID. We actually did some negotiating via Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Kate, these things are an awful lot of work. Thank you for the effort.
Pardon?
These things are an awful lot of work and
Yes,
huge
they
amounts
are.
of detail. Thank you.
So I think, listen, as I think about the number here in the context of what we're going to talk about shortly on the Board of Education one, I mean, it's, I think if you look at sort of settlements for, certified or professional settlements across the state, across the county, they've sort of been in this wheelhouse here. So.
Am I reading it right that, like, this is the way it's set up, but if someone enters in step 1 fiscal year 22-23, the next year, this is not the number, it's that number there, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So you go diagonally.
Yeah, until you get to the last year.
And then
And then that year, you just look at the sort of grid year over year.
Yeah. There's
So-
no step bump, there's just the,
So they're pretty significant bumps in the first, I don't know how linear this is to go from year 1 here to, the lower right corner of this whole grid. But
Jen, do you recall, do you move one step per year, or is it every 2
Steps
years?
1 through 4, you move on your anniversary date, and then from step 4 to step 5 is 18 months.
Got it.
And so the steps within these brackets of patrol officer, sergeants, lieutenants, those are not promotions, it's just years like teachers, or 18 months, like it's time? period?
Yeah, it's time.
Okay.
Yep. And so then if you're a patrol officer, once you hit step 5, that's it. You don't step anymore. You just get the annual wage increase.
Got it.
Which is basically the move from matrix to matrix to matrix, right? From
Yes.
year to year.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, I think, there's been a lot of turnover. I know that the chief wanted to make sure that this was a sort of competitive contract so they could continue to fill vacancies. And I think with, as Kate pointed out, with anticipation of continued sort of turnover, I think having a contract that allows us to attract the best and brightest is certainly important. So, do we want to make a motion to recommend the approval of this contract by the RTM? Okay.
yes.
Okay. Dan moves. John seconds. All those in favor? It's unanimous.
Jim, just a quick aside, did Chief say they're fully staffed? The last time we talked, I know we're a couple months away from doing their budget, but are they back up to 48, 49?
No, I think Kate just said they're at 46 plus I think chief and 2 captains, right?
Right.
Correct.
So plus 3, so which are not unionized.
Got it.
2 under
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like it's too under.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And does that, Jen, do you know, does that include, because there is, I think, is there 2 in the police academy right now or 1?
I think there's one in the academy, and that does include them. It includes anyone who is technically hired. I think it's one in the academy, and I think we may have a couple other candidates that they're working through, so hopefully we'll be full complement soon.
And are we fully staffed on the dispatch side?
I think we're down 1. We had someone recently separate.
Okay.
But this doesn't include.
No, I know, no,
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
as,
yeah.
as while we're on the subject.
Yep. Okay, so the next item is going to be to discuss the Board of Ed contract that they settled with the teachers union. Duke was traveling, wasn't able to come, and Alan, I'm not sure if any of you listened earlier in the week, but I think his voice is mostly gone. So I'm not sure if hopefully you've all been able to listen to some of the meetings in which they discussed this. By way of background, I can tell you I served as the Board of Finance representative with 4 members of the Board of Ed. It was Duke Dedeen, who was the chair, Sarah Parent, who was the secretary, and it was John Cini and Dave Brown. And I can tell you I've been on a few of the Board of Ed's certified union contract negotiations over the past 5 years and so forth, and I would say I think being part of it, sort of how the negotiation was approached by the 4 members of the Board of Ed, plus the staff, which included Adley and Rich Rudel and Marge. I think it was, there was certainly a very detailed review of where Darien sat versus what the Board of Ed believed was their competitive market, which is Fairfield here. And I would say, when you look at overall sort of where the teaching unit sits, if you looked at sort of the upper ranks, at the top, which are sort of 30 to 40% of the teachers that are already at the top step, we generally rank in the sort of 95th percentile. So that's the top end of the master's, top end of the bachelor's, top end of the master's, plus 15, plus 60, plus 30 and 60 credits. This contract was on the heels of a fairly of Greenwich just completing their negotiations. And I think one of the things, as it relates to Darien, in terms of where we're attracting teachers from, the further that teachers have to drive southwest sort of into Fairfield County, the longer the commute becomes and so forth. And, we in Greenwich kind of typically, we're generally right behind Greenwich or right below, I would say, Greenwich in terms of the very high end. They talked about, there were a significant number of teachers or a significant portion of the teachers that we did see leave over the last few years that went to Greenwich. And one of the reasons is that they thought that the sort of, slightly longer commute if you're coming from the Northeast was, more than justified by the additional pay and so forth that they offered. So I think this was, there was an increase at the top end, but the other part of what this contract did is, if you read through Dr. Adley's memo and the presentation was, on the lower level, the lower steps, they cut out a few of the lower steps, which will allow new teachers to start basically at a higher step and therefore higher salary, and allow them to sort of move through the progression quicker. And I think that was, we have a small as a percentage of teachers sort of at the bottom third of our steps and so forth. And I think this was to try to create a schedule that would attract more teachers in that area. The healthcare costs, there was a 1% increase in the cost sharing as it relates to their HSA plan in 2 of the 3 years, which doesn't keep pace with the speed. If you listen to the Board of Ed at their budget discussions, discuss sort of this, the speed at which their healthcare costs continue to rise. So that 1% share doesn't sort of keep pace with that, but it does it does help to offset some of it.
What about non-HSA offerings?
That's the only offering that they have is the HSA.
Okay.
And I think they've been on that for, I want to say, this is probably the third contract or second contract that all the teachers and administrators have been moved to an HSA. I think 3 contracts ago, they were giving some incentives and so forth to move there, but they eventually, I think, with a lot of sort of education around the plan and how to use the plan, moved, all the teachers have been on there for a few contracts. I think if you look at the overall, let me just point you to one thing here. So just looking on page 5 here, like year 1, if you look at the all-in cost, and again, this is similar to what Kate said in the police contract. If you assume the same 400 and approximately 80 teachers remain in the district and they all move through the grid based on their various sort of certification levels and so forth, in each of the 3 years, the percent increase would be 4.85 in the first year, 4.54 in the second year, and 4.29 in the second year. The reason that comes down is, again, assuming all 480 remain in the district, more and more reach that top step. And like the police contract, once you're at the top step, the year-over-year increase is less because you're not also getting the step benefit. But all in, what it added up to was 13.68% increase over 3 years. Again, that assumes nothing changes in the employee pool. If you look historically, we spent a lot of time looking at, well, what has the actual increase been versus that which is sort of mathematically or academically shown by looking at the employee partners for the move through the matrix. In the last 5 to 6 years, it's been approximately 100 basis points less due to attrition, and that would be due to like a step 19 or soon to be 20 teacher retiring and a new step 13 or 14 teacher coming in. So when you look at these percentages, 4.8, 4.5, 4.2, while history is never a sort of guarantee of what's going to happen in the future, you would expect that the amount of sort of the increase that's built into the step would bring the actual annual increases down, give or take 1%.
So I'm not looking at the same thing you are.
This is the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, you sent us the contract.
Yeah, I think there were 3 files. Do you guys have?
I see one.
No.
I just
Well,
have one.
All right, so the
No, the
police
only-
got 2 and 3
All we got
quarters,
was
2
the
and
contract itself. Jim.
What?
All we got was the contract.
Yeah.
3 and an 8, 3
That
and
you
an
sent
8.
just before the meeting?
Yeah.
All we got was the contract, the 50-page
Yep,
contract.
that's it.
We didn't get that.
What were the actual increases in each year? Agreed
Hold
upon.
on 1 second. So the actual increases were 4.85.
So that's not like a blended, I thought that was blended with who's sticking around and who's at the top
Yeah.
step. No, but like, that when they told us the police got 2 and 3 quarters, 2 and 3 quarters, like, that's not 4.85, right? That's a different number?
No, that's the same number. That's the all-in blend. So the police numbers each of the 4 years were a blended.
The 2.75 is the annual base wage increase. The 3.95 that Kate mentioned was the all-in.
Yeah.
So what's the base wage increase here?
So if you want to know like how much did each matrix sort of increase by?
Yeah.
So basically, it was $1,500 from steps 5 through 19, and $2,600 for the top step.
Oh, is it fixed dollar amount, not
Yes.
percentage?
And so the fixed dollar amount, if you look at applying the fixed dollar amount, the same amount to everything, sort of flattens the curve a bit, if you will. If you looked at some of the past teacher contracts, you may have recalled that some steps, as a percentage basis, had much higher increases than others. So by having a sort of the same dollar amount, increase every step by the same dollar amount, what you're effectively doing is sort of increasing the lower steps, step 5 through 19, through 5 through 19, at a greater percentage than you are the top step. And again, I think that was part of the board's strategy to make sure that the lower steps, again, which cover like 60% of our employees, teachers, that those become more competitive over time relative to the top step.
Have we always,
So
negotiated it that way?
so this is the first year.
Yeah, okay.
Traditionally, what they would do is they would have a percentage such that everybody in step 1 through 18 or 1 through 19, every one of those dollar amounts would shift by, let's just say 1.5%, what they might consider like a GWI. And then they would take the top step, which obviously has no more steps to go, and they would negotiate sort of a different GWI for that. This, by not applying the same percentage increase for all of them, but instead the same dollar amount, makes the sort of GWI, makes the speed at which teachers increase in the lower ranks faster than they are in the higher ranks.
I didn't actually catch that number that you said, Kate mentioned. 3.9 was the blended cost for police
3.95.
over 4 years.
That's in the
Over 4
memo
years.
she sent.
Maybe she didn't say it, but it was in the memo.
It's in the memo.
3.95 over 4 years versus 13.86 over.
No,
No,
no, no, no.
3.95 on average.
Per annum.
3.95
Per annum.
year.
Okay.
Yes,
For
so,
each
but
year before
if you
the
take
contract.
13.6 and divide by 3,
Yeah, it's gonna be.
that's 4.5%. And then again, if history sort of prevails in terms of the same type of turnover rates, you would expect to save sort of 90 to 100 basis points.
And to be clear, we were non-competitive on the front end, on the early stage, or bordering non-competitive.
Yeah, I would say if you started at the very bottom step,
Yeah.
we're sort of in the 50th to 60th percentile.
Yeah.
As you made your way up into sort of the belly, into the sort of 12 to step, like 12 or 13 to step 16, we were closer to like the 75th or 80th percentile, again, within sort of the DRG, if you will. And at the top step, we were in the sort of 90 to 95th percentile.
Yeah, I'm seeing for a master's degree minimum, we were 15 out of 26 in the county, and we were 5 of 9 in DRGA. And for the 6th year, we were 16 out of 26 in the county, and 6 of 9 for DRGA.
Yeah.
So, and those moved more competitively, substantially,
Yeah. And
particularly at the front end, at the early end, right? At the minimums.
Correct.
Yes.
And we have less employees there, but the idea is to try to attract more there, so they will accelerate quicker, but it's overall a lower dollar amount.
Right.
I think if you look at it, there's some comparisons in here of us to other districts and so forth. I think it's, because when districts have high step costs, going from step 5 to 19 and so forth in this case, not all those step costs always play out. So when you look at the reported, the way they have to report it to the state and so forth, assuming you're freezing the employee base, okay, those towns with higher step costs generally will report higher wage increases, even though the actual that sort of plays out is lower. When you look at Greenwich and some of the other ones, they have much lower step costs. So that means that's less likely that it results in a lower number, or less lower.
May I
Yeah.
ask, one should also remember that not every, two things. First of all, we call it the teacher's contract, but it's every professional licensed employee in the school. So it's the school psychologist, it's the PTs, it's anyone who requires a license to be in their position. So it's not 100% just teachers that are in that union contract. That's number one. But number two, not every town is doing their contract in the same year. So while we may be 6 out of 9, just remember, it's like a third. So last year, I'm going to use this, I don't know if it's the case, but New Canaan may have just negotiated their teacher's contract with their raise. And so we're always doing a little bit of catch-up based upon where we are, and hopefully this puts us up into a higher rank so that they have to catch up to us.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, New Canaan, you know, they were 1 year sort of ahead of us and everything, but so it's a little bit of sort of catch up, and we're obviously negotiating this in sort of a higher wage inflation environment and so forth. But I think there were some other changes in here and so forth that were small things. If you look at all the stipends for all the coaches and sort of extracurricular activities, those are all increased by approximately 2%. Year over year. So again, you know, this similar to the police contract. We don't formally vote on this, right? So this will move to the RTM, and I think that at their meeting later this month, they'll vote on it, and they either vote on it and pass, or they vote on it and reject it, or if they don't vote on it, just sort of naturally becomes effective through the passage of time. But
I do have a question for you, Jim. And, you know, because I know you've been on this, and I know that you're very cautious with our funds, and this is a high percentage. So I hate to put you on the spot, but do you think this is a good contract from your perspective, having been on the team?
I do, and you know, I was part of the negotiations. Took a long time, and they ultimately went into sort of mediation and so forth. And it was I think we left at 4:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
But I think, listen, there were a lot of issues that were sort of discussed in it. I think if you look at sort of overall in the environment compared to sort of where others are, I think it was a good outcome. I think if you rolling back maybe 4 or 5 contracts, if you guys can remember back that far, you know, many times there was sort of an aggregate amount of cash that was going to be delivered each year, and it was sort of spread maybe kind of strategically all over the contract and so forth, and that's what's led to some of the step increases that you see, where a couple years the steps are small and then they're big, and it's a very sort of uneven and non-smooth matrix. And then for the past 3 years, the way that the contract got negotiated is those numbers, which were a little bit all over the place from a sawtooth perspective, were kept, and year after year, there's just a single percentage applied to every single one of them. Not really, I don't want to say like attacking or optimizing and rethinking what are we actually paying each level and so forth. Does it need to be smoothed out? Do we need to be competitive in one area versus another? And for 3 cycles that went on where there was basically just one number, one percentage number that determined the change from steps 1 through 18, you know, except for the top. And then there's another number, percentage, that applied to the top, and it's usually a little bit higher percentage because there is no step after that. And that happened for 3 years, and I think one of the things I would very much commend the 4 members of the Board of Ed, you know, as well as like, you know, staff that was helping them, is they really looked at the absolute dollars, and this sort of eliminating the bottom couple steps and having a, you know, in this case, like $1,500 for every single step, which is obviously a higher percentage for the lower paid steps than the higher paid steps, I think was a real attempt at sort of smoothing things out. And by adding an additional step to move from step 19 to step 20 and so forth, it took, if you recall, sort of a very high spike, you know, in the penultimate year of your step, there was a significant, like 5.5–6% sort of increase there, which with the GWI produced sort of increases of 8 or 9%. So they sort of smooth that out, and so, you know, I was very kind of both proud and impressed in terms of how they approached this, and the number was a little bit higher than I think than other surrounding towns, but again, they don't have the same step increases. So I think when you look at it, sort of pro forma for turnover, it's a good outcome, and I think they really did a good job trying to fix the matrix to make sure that it's more competitive. I think there still is some more adjustments that sort of need to be done, but moving from the just take what we had last year and apply 1% to it and giving more thought to sort of shaping the curve, if you will. I was very impressed, and I think, listen, it was a lot of engaging discussion with the teachers, and I think the teachers came to the table as well and sort of saw the value in what the board of administration strategy was to be able to make themselves more competitive, sort of at the lower end in the belly of the steps. So, it's a negotiation. It's our largest sort of employee partner group in the entire town. There's about 480 full-time equivalent.
Jim, quick question. We've been talking about financial parameters here almost exclusively. To what degree does the administration sell the incoming teachers on the quality of the student body here in town and the quality of facilities, the dramatic amount of improvements that are planned and under construction, and so on? I would have thought that a nicer work environment, receptive students would be a part of the process in addition to simply what's going to go into somebody's wallet.
Yeah, listen, I think there was a lot of talk about that. In this was the addition of the additional, I'm blanking on the name, sort of PC days, like personal development days, where there's like a half day and the teachers get more professional development. They bring in sort of outside experts and so forth. And so there was sort of an increase there to kind of help further invest in. But no, there was discussions. I mean, listen, they talked about it during the budget. It's I think we have sort of a 2-on-1 device to teacher ratio right now. All teachers have both an iPad and a traditional laptop. So I think all of that sort of was, I think, part of the discussion. And my view is I think that the teachers do recognize that there's a massive investment in this community to support education. We just finished a $60 or $58 million Oxford school. We're near finishing, and we're investing another 80 million gross into the refurbishment of 3 other elementary schools, and we continue to invest all around to make sure that they have the resources. So I do think there's an acknowledgement. I think that's one of the reasons why teachers do come here, but ultimately we are sort of in comp with other districts around us. So
How did this compare to Greenwich?
So we were a little bit higher than Greenwich, again, as they sort of, as they report it, but Greenwich has a lower sort of built-in step cost. So all else being equal, it's, I think it's very comparable.
So when you look at it in arrears,
Yes.
taking turnover into account, you think it's probably close to a push, if not a push?
On an overall
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
But again, we were already at sort of 95th percentile, sort of at the top ends. This sort of brought up
Yeah.
the bottom end.
Yeah.
It's great that they looked at the numbers and kind of smoothed that out.
Yeah.
That's progress.
I want to thank you for that answer, because at least for myself and my committee, and knowing how you've approached union contracts in the past, and this one obviously coming in higher than what anybody likes and what's there, but that response will carry a lot of weight when we're talking about it in my committee and when I present to the RTM. So thank you for.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was a full negotiation. Extremely sort of, I think, proud of the leadership on the board for the 4 members that that worked to negotiate it. It was there were discussions around everything, and I think and there were 10 teacher representatives as well who were there till 4 o'clock in the morning with us as well. So it was a long negotiation, but I think ultimately, in the end, I think both parties were. I think sometimes they say it's a good negotiation if both parties walk away a little bit unhappy. I think both parties walked away, I think, kind of very happy with what came out of the contract. So I guess we can, there's no formal action needed. If we wanted to take a motion to recommend this to the RTM, we could do that, similar to what we did in the police budget. Would anyone like to, Rob, would you like to make a motion to recommend the approval of the proposed 3-year contract with the teachers union?
Yes.
Rob moves. Dan seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous.
And Jim, thanks for your hard work on this. I know it was,
Yeah, thank you.
I know it was a knockdown,
4 o'clock in the
short
morning.
amount of time.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, it was great, and I would say they were great partners, and we worked together, and there was a lot of work done on this contract.
Being doing it at 4 a.m., that's
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Okay, the next item is going to be item 3, set the interest rate for tax deferrals.
So we must do this every year per our code of ordinances, and we have 2 tax deferral plans. Plan A requires us to set the interest rate at 0.5% above the December investment earnings rate for STIF, and Plan B requires us to set it at 1% above that December rate for STIF. The December earnings rate was 4.38%, so that puts Plan A at 4.88% and Plan B at 5.38%.
And Jen, can you remind us, who chooses if there is a tax deferral, which plan someone's put on? Is that the?
Goes through the assessor's office, and I
Okay.
believe there's income thresholds.
Got it.
This is codified, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Formulaic.
What?
Formulaic.
Yes. And I think this is hundreds of basis points higher than what it was.
Yeah, last year I think it was 0.1%.
Yeah.
Was the December rate.
Yeah. So I think, although we're voting on sort of the tax deferral rate, I think it is good evidence and sort of reminder of how significant that fund, which Joan is now using more and more to invest in alongside treasuries and other options, how far interest rates are up. So this is, I'll take a motion to set the interest rate for tax deferrals for Plan A at 4.88 and for Plan B at 5.38. Dan moves. John seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, the next one is to discuss and take action on a request to reallocate bond proceeds and rescind the appropriation and bond authorization for the Royle roof replacement project.
Correct. Royal Roof, we had authorized bonding and an appropriation of $863,000 back in May of 2021. Board of Ed was beginning to work on it. They had some consultant work done to the tune of $16,760. But then it was decided to include the roof project in the Royal Elementary School renovation project, larger project, which was included in that increased appropriation that you did a few months ago. So what we are looking to do here is transfer unused bond proceeds from the Homes Roof and Skylight project to cover the $16,760 that's been spent on Royal, and then to rescind the appropriation and bond authorization and close out that standalone Royal project.
And the 16,000 was just for some initial design work and
Right.
sort of cats and mice type expenses?
Yep.
Yeah. And Jen, sorry, which project are we reallocating this to?
We're taking it from the home school roof project and to the Royal roof project.
So the 16,000 will just bump up by $1 million? Is that, are you talking about going to the Royal part of the HHR?
No, so we have a homes roof project,
Yep.
which we borrowed $1,020,000 for. We do not need all of that. So we're going to reallocate some of those unneeded bond proceeds from homes to fund the 16,760 that's been spent on the standalone Royle project, and
Oh.
then that project will be done.
Got it, okay. Okay. No, it seems like a no-brainer. May I take a motion? Rob, second? John, all those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, next one is to discuss our fiscal '24 budget process and assignments. Jen printed out for all of you the sort of breakdown of the Board of Selectmen budget. By how it's going to be presented to us, sort of in the spreadsheet, if you will, right, Jen?
Right.
So, we don't need to make a decision tonight, but what I would like, sort of two things. I'd like for you each to kind of come back and let me know which areas of the budget you would want to have as sort of your first choice and what you might want to have as your second choice. And I would say in terms of doing that for everyone, particularly some of those that have, been on the board for a while, and I'll relay this to Paul and to Dave. Try to choose half of the sort of time that you're going to allocate to something new. I think it's absolutely great to continue the institutional knowledge sort of that we have in certain of these units and so forth. For instance, Dan, you and Rob have been on the police budget for a while, and you guys have sort of a lot of that institutional knowledge around that, and I think that's great. But what I'd like to do is make sure that we're all really getting exposure to all the different departments, having the opportunity to kind of work with those department heads and or some of the employees there. So I have some ideas. I have last year's and so forth. Look at what you did last year. Think about sort of what you had interest in. And even, and I'll use the police department as an example. Probably very good to keep, because we're usually buddy systems on some of these, to keep at least one person on, and maybe someone else switches to bring someone else on. I just think it's kind of really good as we think about, making sure that this board is, we have experience in everything. We continue to kind of plan ahead. I think it's very helpful. So take this back, think about sort of where your interests are, where you might want to move. And like I said, in certain instances, I'll probably take and maybe move one person off if a pair have sort of been on something for a while, and move you around. I think I have a spreadsheet from Jack where he is either working on or going to be assigning people from F&B to these various different committees. And so we'll make sure that we can kind of sync up, over the next few weeks as the Board of Selectmen budget kicks off. Jack?
And I've also sent out to all department chairs, asking them to copy Jim and myself as to who their reps are. I will say that from F&B's perspective, on Public Works, Martha moved out of town, and based upon the need of the prior chair and vice chair not being reelected in the RTM Public Works, Mark Guidaletta moved back to Public Works. So, we're going to have new people on the Public Works side because we lost two very talented people. So just keep that in mind when we're working with you. But yeah, we're trying to do the same thing. I think Jim's discussion of, that cross knowledge within the organization makes a heck of a lot of sense.
And it looks like, Jen, the town will present its budget to the Board of Selectmen on the 30th?
Yes.
Okay, that's when the town's process, or the Board of Selectmen's process formally kicks off?
Correct.
Yep.
Right, okay.
So a couple things that I've started doing as we're talking about sort of budget areas. When we get to the Board of Ed, historically, there, I think last year, myself and Taylor and Paul, and I think maybe David, the four of us were on it together. Been thinking about that, like the process a bit here, and that budget, 110 million, the superintendent's proposed budget out of just a little over 116 million. I think the size of that, right, and it's 75%-ish of her overall spending. I think I want to make sure that we're all very focused on that budget, right? And I think there's some of us that may have more history and more kind of knowledge around that, but I think it's really like going to be incumbent on all of us to, the superintendent had his introductory meeting last Thursday, and then they had Super Saturday, and they had another meeting earlier this week where they're sort of beginning to answer the rounds of questions that are being put forward by their board and other boards. So I would follow it all closely here, because I think it's really incumbent on us. We all need to sort of have an opinion on that. It's, just given the overall size of it and complexity of it.
That all being said, I think we were on the call for Super Saturday.
Yep.
Three of us, yeah.
Do we still want to go with the practice, Jim, of streamlining questions? Like if I have 3 and Dan's got 4, and
Yeah.
all of us have questions, send them to you, you're going to consolidate them, send them, so they're not just flying into.
Correct. What I'd like to do is sort of bring them all together. I have a list of questions.
I'm sure you got your own.
Yep.
And then there's
So
the other
I'd
ones.
like to kind of bring them together, sort of understand where everybody's questions are, and combine where I can, so that if 2 of them overlap or really getting at the same issue, I'll send them back around to you, make sure. But I think the more efficient I think we can be, and also listen, some of them have already been answered and so forth.
Yep.
But I think the plan would be to deliver those questions to the Board of Finance, to the Board of Ed.
Yep.
They have a meeting on Tuesday night, the 17th. So it would be deliver those questions there. And that still gives the Board of Ed, they have a couple more meetings by which they can think about the questions that we've asked. And I'll just tell you, like a lot of the questions you'll see from me, there were some questions I have, and there were also sort of suggestions, because we need to, we can't just ask them questions. Those questions really need to be, and I would encourage everyone, ask questions that help lead you to a decision or a recommendation, right? About whether an area needs to be bigger, smaller, changed, whether there's an efficiency that we might think needs to be driven or something like that. But try to ask questions where it's going to ultimately lead you to, or us to be able to make a recommendation to them. Because I do think, in all fairness, we need to sort of give them, initial opinions that we have, high, low, left, right, whatever it is, on things before they vote on it. Because it really is sort of their budget, and it's good for them to sort of develop it with our, not only the question that we're asking, but the opinions or the suggestions that we have ahead of time.
Jack, are you doing yours the same? You're going to roll your questions up?
There's 2 things. First of all, one of the good things that came out, and it really started with, when Jim was talking about setting the guidance last year on core versus growth, and then we took that in F&B, and when we presented the budget for the RTM approval, we started talking about what were the increases in the core and what was the increases in the growth for both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen. And I think there was a universal opinion that it helped explain the budget increases to not only the other elected officials, but also to the town. And so you'll see that already presented and Rich, and I believe Kate is going to be doing something similar. We'll be doing some tweaks. So we met last night to basically talk about some basic areas. There have been submitted questions, to reiterate what Hadley says, or Rich. All of the questions that were raised are now on their website, and so you can see what some of the answers are. we're trying not to ask as many duplicate questions as can be, because there's certain things that, having worked with you guys and having worked with Ed, you know, you see something, and I guarantee you all three of us are asking the same question. So, but yes, this is a large increase. And it doesn't sort of line up with the, pardon me for saying it, Jim, doesn't line up with the guidance that we heard in the state of the town. And, you know, it's going to be a challenge to figure out what is the right number, but I think most of us can agree that 5% is not that number.
Yeah. And I think I would say, like, the 5% sort of increase is, you know, some of which we know includes, like, the recently hired, you know, sort of security
Yes, I
staff
saw
and so
it.
forth, but
Okay.
that's a 5% increase on top of, that's versus last year's approved budget. But we know that last year's approved budget right now is running approximately a 50 basis point surplus.
Yeah.
So you would actually say next year's proposed is 5.5%, I'm using round numbers here, versus what the actual amount was this year. But I think it's, you know, there's been some good discussion and around, and some good data that they've provided, because it's, you know, a lot of the variance this year came from three different pockets. One was just less students, I think about 65 or 70 less students than they expected, right? And that's about 1.3% of the total student population. There's another piece that they just had some difficulties, I shouldn't say difficulties, but they've had delays in sort of bringing on certain like non-certified and assistant and like kind of paraprofessionals and so forth to fill some vacancies. And then the last piece, you may recall in the last budget, as part of the budget, there were some changes in the way the excess cost reimbursement works. And the changes in the budget and the law actually sort of cost the town about $140,000. But then based on the reimbursement rate and the way that the thresholds are set by which we get reimbursed above, there's about a $500,000 savings right there. So it's really between a greater reimbursement of special ed expenses, a sort of delay in bringing on certain support staff, and then just less kids, which is causing a surplus. And so I think when you look at the projections for next year, they're assuming another 2.5% increase in population versus this year, which is down a little over 1% from the year before.
But, and I'm going to add something, and I asked them to look and be aggressive, and I actually spoke only because I perceive that I've heard Jim say in the past that, you know, if you need money at some time in the year because we miscalculated something, that the Board of Finance and I said the RTM, we're going to support you. But at the same token, it means we should start looking at some of the historic accounts that hasn't necessarily been fully used. Budget control might be one of them. And so that's some of the things to look at is like, yeah, you can build all this, but if we know we're only delivering that, maybe it's time to relook at some of how certain things are built to tighten things up with the knowledge that they have to trust that your organization, your board, and I committed the F&B and my committee concurred with that. If they end up being short or running a deficit like they did in COVID, we're going to be there for them. But we'd rather that it's tight and you look at what you can do within the year to make certain changes and go in there and go from there. And I hope that's similar to what you've been saying.
Yeah, the comments I made in the State of the Towns were around we should be budgeting not conservatively or aggressively, we should be budgeting accurately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, budgeting as accurate as possible will prevent, you know, surpluses from building up and kind of going back into the general fund. Now, we, I guess I would say sort of are fortunate now where we have a lot of capital projects above us. So large capital projects, $80 million for the elementary schools and fire trucks and land acquisitions, right? So we have more capital needs or uses, I would say, to manage, where we want to keep the general fund, whereas like the last couple of years, remember, like all of our budgeted, budget cycle capital, we basically filled 100% of it by using surpluses and or from the general fund. I think we have greater flexibility. Well, I guess we're spending more on capital, so we have the ability to manage it more, but I think we want to be budgeting as accurately as possible, because not doing so, we're really sort of overtaxing the residents. I know we plow it back into next year's budget. We haven't always been able to use all of it, so I think, things like budget control, estimates should be what we expect, not sort of like a cushion and so forth. And I think that's what we've done on the Board of Selectmen side, where we've eliminated a lot of the small little capital reserves that exist all over. We sort of aggregated that in one reserve, which staff helps us manage and so forth. And as I remind everybody, the town really only needs one big reserve fund, and that's the general fund, and we have about $27+ million in that now.
Plus, the Board of Ed capital, in the past, it was running $2-3 million on average. Because we're rebuilding schools, or we just completed another one, they're only asking for $1.1 million on their capital side now. We still don't know what's coming on the town side, but, that means that, as Jim said, one of the concerns that I have is, if we have excesses at the end of the year, it goes back into the general fund, but we only use that to pay for capital unless there's a need, like COVID or something like that. I would prefer that we don't use that solely constantly for capital, that we tax less. And if we get a little tight, we've shown that we can fund you. And I think that's a much better way for our taxpayers, because we're still maintaining healthy balance in the general fund.
Yeah, I think we like surpluses. I don't want anyone to say that we don't like think that we don't like surpluses, because I think that both operating boards do a good job of sort of managing costs, but we don't want sort of consistent surpluses in certain areas. So if we can budget them tighter, tax less, and Jack, to your point on using it for capital, we do have so we can choose to use $1 million out of the general fund to pay for part of a fire truck, part of an island, or part of the HHR program. So
Part of it, or I just want to check, like the increase this year is a stated 5%, but like you said, you've got to add back the surplus that they're still running, which we have to estimate because we won't know until the end of the year, but then also the transfers that have already happened to fund the security and the mental health person, and I don't know what else. When was the last time we asked, because I know we've always been denied, but for the budget in spreadsheet format, so it's easier to analyze because it's...
I was thinking
on the
of what you had requested before.
On the heels of our discussion at our last meeting, I asked the administration and the board to put together a spreadsheet which shows every single line item, or not all 12,000 of them, but like all like the sort of the big areas. It shows what the projected budget for this year that they're going to put forward looks like versus 2022 actual, what 2023 budgeted was, what 2023 adjusted budget looks like, and what 2023 forecast looks like. So you can see now in player in spreadsheet format what they're projecting versus what they actually spent, adjusted for all the transfers.
It's a 29-page document, and it's on the Board of Ed website.
Yeah.
A spreadsheet.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
think
spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's a
That we
spreadsheet.
can download and work with.
It's an
I
Excel
mean, I would
spreadsheet.
like to have all 12,000
Yeah.
line items, to be clear. Like, I mean it. It's not that bad if you spread that, because if you had a tab for each of our DRCs, it's what, 26 tabs or whatever it ends up being.
Was a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just formats.
We can have it however you want.
It has to exist that way.
You just need to sort of decide how you want to accumulate. Take a look at what's up there, and if we want to sort of aggregate it different ways,
Okay, that's great.
we can.
Well, show me later.
Yep.
For those that are new, you
It's on the
should
Board of Ed
understand
website, yeah.
that Taylor actually took all those numbers and put them into a spreadsheet manually for herself to do an analysis on the Board of Ed. I guess that was about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I did it for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Like,
So
it was back in
that's-
Brenner's day.
When we were looking at this year's budget, I was right back to, like Jim's request for, can we have that Excel download so we can play a little bit with some of this?
I mean, Rich put it together lickety split, and it was,
Yeah,
it's
and I
we can
want-
get it expanded as much as
Yeah.
you might need, but just take a look at what we have up there now.
I will, and
It's
I want to
pretty-
say that, like, the reason I did that was because we were seeing recurring themes of certain places where there was cash that might not have needed to be there, and it kept getting moved to other places, and so we were starting to like hone in on that. Then we had to change administration, we had COVID and whatever, and I have to say, like, this is a whole different administration. Like, the transparency, the honesty, the upfrontness about Rich and Dr. Ed is great, and so I don't have those same concerns, but it is, I don't want to put those numbers in manually again, so.
Yeah, I think they're all, I think they're 1,800 numbers.
Concerns are still there, and that's my concern. The areas that you were identifying
Well, I
5
don't
years
know.
ago are still there a little bit.
So, okay, well, Jack, we'll look forward to getting all the, syncing up with your team here on assignments and so forth. Okay, next item is the transfer. So discuss and take action on a request to transfer $31,275 to professional services at the Finance Department.
We engaged an outside firm to conduct an audit of our telecom spending. We sent them 2 months worth of every wireless, landline, cable, I'm missing one other category, but we sent them all of our telecom invoices. They analyzed all of them, came back to us with recommended savings opportunities. And then Kate and I went through all of those, reached out to the affected departments, to IT, and identified about $31,000 worth of savings. The biggest area where we have savings is what they termed excessive and unused phone lines, which was about $14,000. So they tested all of the phone numbers on our 40-page Frontier bill, and they identified if it just rang, if there was no activity, they tried a couple times, and they identified those as excessive and unused. And then IT also went through each of those lines and tested them and identified which of those they were comfortable with us canceling.
Were these just positions that got eliminated and no longer needed?
I don't know the history. Some of them are old. We actually used to have a landline for maybe an alarm that's now switched over to maybe a cellular. And when the alarm changed, nobody thought, oh, I should also contact somebody about the phone line. So maybe we moved away from some landlines, but they were still sitting there. We were still paying for them.
Fax machines.
We canceled almost all of our fax lines because they were still there. They were still in use, they were still live, but
Right.
nobody's using them.
Right.
Get all the
So we-
telex lines too?
I think that's what they for-
So we kept a couple of fax lines, but that was one of the big ones that we disconnected. So we went through every one of their recommendations. There were some that we didn't take. I think overall they had identified about $55,000 worth, but some of those were lines we needed to keep or various things that we felt we needed for operational reasons. But overall, it's about $31,000. The request for the transfer is because we need, the arrangement with the auditing firm is they get 12 months worth of any savings that we take. So we owe them $31,000, but we're gonna have 5 months of savings in this current fiscal year, and then we'll be able to put $30,000 of savings into next year's budget for this. So it's about 20% of our townwide telecom spend.
That's pretty good.
I'm so impressed with the efficiency of this. Like, what prompted that?
They actually reached out to me. It's something that towns will do from time to time, and
That's cool.
for some normally I'm like, oh, yeah, when I have time, but for
Love
some
it,
reason
and
I was like,
incentives.
yeah,
I love
now's
that.
the time, and it worked out really. I had no expectation that they would identify this much.
Was this only across the town side or the Board of
Yeah,
Ed side?
Only on the town side.
Is the Board of Ed aware that we did this?
No.
Jim, we're thinking alike. One of my questions was,
Yeah.
Jen, can you pass that name over to Rich?
I will,
can.
I'm gonna, if you, that would be great.
There's a lot of fax machines.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting to see how knowledgeable they were about the different coatings and types of lines and everything that are identified. And it was interesting.
I know the Board of Ed, I want to say, 18 months ago, did an audit of one of their bills, and it may have been something to do with communications, and found that they had been overcharged for a few years.
Yeah,
And
they'll
they
look
came
for
back, but-
opportunities like that too. Say if we could provide documentation that we told the phone company to cancel a line and they didn't, we could seek some recoupment of that. But they looked for other opportunities to recoup costs as well, and nothing popped up.
Well, I think this is great, and thank you.
So Jen, just to be clear, we're paying them $31,275.
Yep,
That's next year's savings, but we're getting 5 months of savings this year.
yeah.
Well, that's 12 months of savings. So
Right,
we're
the
paying them
31 is 12 months.
5 months this
worth.
year, 7 next year.
Yeah. We gotta front them the 12 months and we'll start realizing it. But budgetarily, we're gonna see,
But they recommended 55,000
they did.
and the spend is 154? Okay.
But I mean, they were pretty aggressive on some things and,
I've done these.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've never seen, usually they do, my arrangements have seen 20 to 40% of recoupment, I should say. So it is what it is, whatever we found. But yeah, they cold call.
Oh, yeah.
And they just,
Interesting.
it really is. It's interesting.
Yeah, and this particular one had a
You're
couple of
astounded.
references, because a lot of times they haven't even done business in Connecticut, and like, I don't really know anybody that I could check with, but they had recently done work with some people whose opinion I valued, and they spoke highly of this organization, so we went with them.
I think it's gotten a little tighter over the years. I think last time I did was literally in like the late 90s.
Yeah.
I worked for a brokerage firm that had like like telephone lines and trading desks and whatnot, and it was backups to backups, and like we ended up like $400,000 or something crazy because you just don't shut these things off. Or you got a client that has we used to call like a terminal. It was like a
Yep.
lack of a better word, one of these early version of this, and it was astounding the check we got. It was incredible, but I think it's a little more efficient now.
I think so.
Do they
Almost.
do-
It looks like-
Thank you.
Well, I don't think we've ever done this, so.
Yeah, and there's stuff that's been out there forever.
Two
The
really
fax
good
ones
things
kill me.
came out of this. I think one is obviously the thorough job they did and the savings that you're going to receive. But also, it's awfully good of you guys to be as cooperative and supportive of this. Sometimes outsiders come in and nobody wants to see them, like auditors.
Yeah, it worked out very well.
Good job.
Do they audit sort of TV subscriptions and music subscriptions? Because like we could probably, I could probably use them at the Galen House.
I am happy to say we do not have any of those.
Hey, there's a firm that does that. I can talk to
Yeah.
you later about it.
There
Seriously.
actually is an app that does it,
Yeah.
so that you
Yeah.
can start to look at what you
Yep.
have been spending.
Yeah, they've been
But
advertising.
as you guys are talking, I remember when we did it, we still had telex lines coming around.
Yeah.
For
Yep.
those of us old enough to remember those.
All those things. They just added up.
Well, great work. So can I have a motion to transfer $20,868 from our Board of Finance contingency and $10,407 from the telecommunications budget, all into the professional services budget, for a total of $31,275. Rob moves. Taylor seconds. All those in favor? That's great. Financial report next.
So I had to put this together on the 9th, and at that time, we didn't have the December property taxes closed out, and we didn't have all of our December statements. So those numbers on the report in front of you are through 5 months, but I do have updates now. So property tax, we've collected 95.8 million year to date through December, and that's 63.46% of budget. On this one, I do want to say that Kathy Larkins, our tax collector, has said that she's noticing some softening in collections. She'll have a better sense of it after we get all the way through the January collections period. But she saw a little bit of a drop off in December. Part of it was just escrow that used to go through People's Bank. People's always paid in December, and M&T did not pay in December. They paid in January. But even accounting for that, she's seeing a little bit of softening in the collections. So she's keeping an eye on that.
On investment income, our year-to-date through December is actually 494,995, and that is 690% of budget. And I think you all got Joan's most recent portfolio report. So we're doing very well on that one. And then overall bottom line revenue, we've collected $99.9 million, which is 62.71% of budget. A little ahead of our 5-year average, and a lot of that is due to investment income being so far ahead.
How are we doing on building permits?
They're doing okay. I don't have the most recent amount for redevelopment, but we only planned $57,000 for that, so that's not a big concern. But overall, we're doing well. We've collected about 53% of budget, so a lot of that is just our base normal type of permits.
Yep, okay.
And then on the expenditure side, things are tracking as expected. As we discussed earlier, we're carrying a couple of vacancies in the police department. We are looking to fill a vacancy that's been carried in the building department, which I believe we're expecting to have someone on board in the next couple of months. And everything else is as expected. On page 4.
Hey, Jen,
Yeah.
Jen, question on the library. How do we track what percentage they've used? Because we send them the whole grant at the beginning of the year, or do they draw down?
We pay them quarterly. So there's a couple things that we pay directly on our side: pension contribution, workers' comp, liability premiums. Once we back those amounts out, the difference we split over 4 quarterly payments to them. And once it goes out our door, we have no visibility into how much they have spent.
Okay, so this is kind of what we've fronted then, quarterly plus the stuff that we pay.
Yep.
And then we really don't find out. Maybe as part of the budget process, and I can maybe reach out to Kier, we should have them sort of report back to us, kind of where are they
That would be a good idea.
inside their budget process. Or I should say their actual versus expected.
On page 4, state revenues. Down at the bottom, we have Town Aid Road. It shows it going into the reserve for capital non-recurring. That's where we budgeted this year. But we will be recognizing it in the general fund. Last month I told you that we moved it to the general fund for fiscal '22 just to make compliance with the grant requirements easier. So we're going to move that again in '23, which means we'll have to do some recalculation on what we have to transfer from the general fund over to RFC and RE. But in the '24 budget, we're just going to budget it right in the general fund. It's just a way of ensuring that we'll have no issues with grant compliance.
Hey, Jen, can you remind me what MRSA sales tax sharing is?
Municipal revenue sharing, so of sales tax.
Of sales tax that goes into?
Goes to the state,
our portion?
and then they allocate it out based on how much they've collected.
And we don't put a budget amount because we never know if it's coming or not? Or is it?
Last year, this was kind of just surprise money. I think they had more sales tax than they had expected, and because we haven't gotten it for several years.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
And that, actually, I think they may have had it in their budget, and CCM recommended that towns don't budget for it because they didn't expect it to come to fruition. On page 5, we have all the contingency and unassigned fund balance. I do have a typo down at the bottom. Unassigned fund balance, the 7/1/2022, is now the audited amount because the audit is complete. And there's really nothing else that I wanted to note.
This comment in here on parking pay stations, that's a current comment, that's not a dated comment? That we're collecting 31,000 a month, and pre-pandemic we're at 48,000 a month?
Yes, that is correct.
Which suggests that we are running approximately a third below pre-pandemic levels on
Right.
that usage. That's interesting.
Yeah, we're
I
still.
guess that's probably a lot of, it's still option, Mondays and Fridays are still optional for a lot of folks, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, trains are packed Tuesday through Thursday.
But not Mondays and Fridays.
No.
I think
So that's-
Mondays
you can
are-
just drive by.
They're pretty busy.
I mean, Monday's
Drive through
busier.
the parking lot, you'll notice.
Yeah, if you drive by if you drive at least by Norton Heights, you'll see the stark difference between Mondays and Fridays and
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So that, it's
Fridays still seem a little light. but-
clearly, well, it's a third lower, just by because that's where the flex is, right? Because it's not in the permits.
Right, the permits are very strong, everybody wanted to renew.
Yeah, right. It's a pretty good indicator. Okay.
I will say on ARPA, you can see that there's a couple of projects that have small amounts left. First one that jumps out at me, I'm on page 14, is vaccination clinics. We're done with our vaccination clinics. There's about $7,000 remaining in that appropriation. Kate and I are putting our heads together to come up with a process for closeout and reappropriation of some amounts, whether we recommend a threshold or something like that. But now that some things are being completed, we're going to have money moving back into contingency, and we'll have to have a process for reappropriating that.
I see nothing's been purchased under the sort of pot in a box.
Yeah, I just
Yep.
noticed that, yeah.
They've been doing a lot of planning. I know they went and they looked out at the trailer. They have their list of items. We just haven't paid any invoices on it yet.
And do they think they'll spend it all on the,
I believe so, yeah. I think they're going to be pretty close to spending all of that.
and is this stuff that has sort of a long life? Are we trying to put in that?
Some of it is shorter life, but it's not going to be just for like pandemic response. It'll be emergency response. There'll be other uses for it. And it's my understanding that they've come up with an arrangement with Post 53 that if there are items in the PODM in a box that are coming close to expiration date that Post 53 can use, we would swap it with Post 53 who may have something that's further away from its expiration date.
And just question, the rescue jacks here, was that part of what was going to be added to the rescue truck, the new rescue jacks?
No. I'll confirm with Brian, but I don't recall.
Because it's
It may be
TFD.
another set if they have it on there, but I'll confirm with Brian, but as far as I know, these are separate
Okay.
and not duplicated.
Yeah, just check with them if you could.
Too bad we couldn't apply some of this to the shockingly high cost of the new truck.
Yeah.
Say that was a COVID outcome.
Okay. You guys, any other question on the financials?
No.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Next item is the review of the minutes for December 20th. This was the money for the compensation study for town hall employees, right?
Right.
And the fire truck.
I don't have any changes, it looks good.
Yeah, I looked at it, it's fine, looks fine.
And then I think just because we're talking about the minutes here, I'll remind you guys, remember the base fire truck, like the base price they had negotiated as part of the co-op pricing and so forth, if you will, was 1.7. The contract that they ultimately signed was approximately 1.63. It's about $70,000 less than that, but they did sign it. It looks like this week, I think they signed it, Jen?
I have not heard from Brian.
Yeah. So any comments on the minutes?
No.
Okay, motion to approve the Board of Finance regular meeting minutes from December 20th, 2022. Motion? Rob moves. John seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous.
That's my job.
Okay. Special assignments.
Damn.
Almost got to clean some.
I'll kick things off like with audit, which right now Rob and I and Taylor are on, and I think we are going to have John join us here on this. All the materials are back from the auditor, and we have a call scheduled for next Friday afternoon to kind of run through the report
Week
with
from
them.
tomorrow.
What?
A week from tomorrow.
Yeah, a week from tomorrow.
3
Yes.
PM.
Yep.
So
2 p.m.?
3 p.m. We'll forward
We'll get you the invite.
the invite
Is he taking
around.
my seat on the committee? Am I out?
Yeah. Well, sorry.
No one told you?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Better than you're in.
You're not a better man.
I know it's early in the year, but I never see Taylor more happy.
Rob and I got together and we said, given like the email traffic today about the scheduling, we had to move you off.
Good. Excellent decision.
Wait a minute, why are you so happy?
Well, you got to pass your calculator over to.
Yes.
That's not working.
Fine.
I want a great nightshade.
John, I'll send you a copy of the audit.
Thank you.
And I think on that note, because we're going to
Isn't there
forward you
one
the.
you didn't just send one around?
I think I only sent it to the committee members so far, because normally we
Yes.
have the committee review it first before we
Send
Yeah.
it
And
again.
then
send
we
it to
send it.
all.
And I think just a reminder to people here, if you're using your town email and you have it on your iPhone or your iPad, you're all sort of set up, make sure you turn on your calendar as well as your mail.
Mhm.
You know, otherwise these invites won't actually pop up into your calendar. So just, you know, like in the settings, when you turn on what you need for your town account,
Yep.
based on that response, I'll show you
Whatever
how to do
happened
it.
today, is that part of it? I
no.
don't know what I did wrong.
No, but I'll show you, but just
That was his fault.
make sure
not
stuff
mine,
does
by
sneak
way.
into the calendar.
I fix it tomorrow, and then people unknown couldn't make tomorrow, so it's fine. Next Friday it works
Yeah.
perfectly.
People known but unsaid.
People previously on the committee. Okay, so
Okay.
in terms of other special
Next Friday's
assignments, Paul's not here on pension. Anything new on technology?
So tech, we're meeting next Thursday, so I'll get an update then for the team, and then my committee, subcommittee, I should say, excuse me, IT efficiency will have results for the IT survey. So I think it's going to, I'll be able to kind of present those in a more comprehensive way at the next meeting.
Okay. Anything on?
On Oxbridge, the assembly wing has moved out of the concrete steel stage to the plumbing and electricity stage. So that's the electrical work. So it's progressing along, on time, under budget, full steam ahead.
Okay. Dave is not here to discuss HHR, but I think that's continuing to move along. I think there's, I think some of the projects are in front of P&Z. I think they had a meeting on either yesterday or day before talking about some of the drainage at homes in connection with like that back lot and so forth. But I think that's moving forward. As we think about bonding some of the other capital projects, I will say, rates have kind of continued to move a little bit in our favor here. Not only the absolute level of treasuries, but municipals have continued to sort of perform relative to treasuries. So all good there. I don't have any new business other than to remind everybody, or on the chairman's report, to remind everybody that we're in budget season. I've actually started, I'm not going to ask Jim Cameron, Channel 79 to do the same, but on Vimeo, I've actually created a sort of, they call it like a subfolder where you can attract all the relevant meetings for the different budgets. You can sort of put in there with notes. So I'm going to ask him to do that like officially on that account, but it's a great way that I've found to sort of track all these meetings, which ones you need to watch and so forth. So I'll share that with you guys this weekend.
I have a question. Kate just sent out this emergency services study. I found it fascinating, actually, and incredibly comprehensive. Well, what happens to it now?
Board of Selectmen is working through the recommendations. I think they got the draft a little sooner and started looking at it, and they'll make some decisions on how they want to proceed, what recommendations they want to pursue, that kind of thing.
The page that struck me was page 46, where it lists the fire equipment needs. And it seems to, the one thing that, for example, the thing that jumps off the page is that yes, we're replacing Rescue 44, but then there's Rescue 25, which according to this was acquired in 1989, and then does it need to be replaced as well for another 1.7? And there are 2 other trucks on here that are listed as being replaced in, or at least I guess the purchase process initiated in 2023. Well, what effect is that going to have on capital budget going forward in terms of timing?
Yeah. I think the other 2 trucks were originally proposed as part of last year's budget along with Rescue 44. Rescue 44 is kind of moving forward. The other 2 trucks, I think they are still sort of being reviewed and everything.
Okay.
What was the other rescue that they talked?
It's called Rescue 25, acquired in 1989 in Norton Heights.
2 is Norotan Heights. I think that was acquired then, but I do think we did a refit on that, didn't we?
Mhm. And also,
Yeah.
it's a different rescue vehicle than what you have at Darien, because Darien's the main one that covers 95 and any major accident that happens in town. So that I hate to say is primary, I'm probably using the wrong word, but that is our primary rescue vehicle.
Okay.
The other ones are not as sophisticated as that one was or is going to be.
Yeah, but I do think that one was refinished since
You're right
like
on that.
1989 or whatever.
Okay.
I think there was an amount that was done there. So I think ultimately the Board of Selectmen will take actions on that as relates to anything that sort of needs to be done or organizational structure and so forth. And the question will be, what types of operating expenses or capital expenses sort of come out of that as a result of any changes that they make there. But
Just to go back to the one that we just all approved. In the past, typically, the town would pay 25% upon putting in the order, and you pay 75% on delivery. I happened to walk out and speak to Brian when he presented to the Board of Selectmen. This one's unique. We're not putting out any money until we get it, and it's not the typical 18 to 24 months. It could be a 24 to 36 based upon material needs and other things like that. So that's also something to consider as these other things are coming through. We may be approving an appropriation and the bonding, but the bonding ain't happening next week.
Fair enough,
Or even
Jack.
within this year.
The concern that seems to be coming up is that these new trucks cost multiples of what we thought they were going to cost.
Which is why, yes, but also, the decision to bond, which is having the people that are gonna get the use out of it paying for it, as opposed to accruals that was done in the past, which would have massive amounts of allocated funds.
Sure.
It was a good decision
Agreed.
made.
Yeah. And I think on the cost, I think if you look at, we just signed the contract for like a tad over 1.6. Originally, that truck was estimated to cost, I think, 1.3. The 2 that we approved includes an extra $300,000 of sort of equipment. So apples to apples, it sort of went from 1.3 to 1.6 plus, along with taking a lot of what they thought was going to originally take 18 to 24 months is now close to 36 months. So, but. Okay, any new business?
No?
Okay, I'll accept the motion to adjourn. Rob makes motion, John seconds. All those in favor?
Locomotion.
Thank you. So thank you, 79.